Corporal Batter hurled Eric out of the exit gate as if he were nothing more than a sack of rubbish. "And don't come back!" barked Batter as the boy scrambled to his feet. Eric said nothing. He dashed all the way home. His grandmother would be waking up soon, and she'd be worried about him if she didn't find him tucked up in the bed in the morning. However, as the boy turned the corner on the street where he lived, he noticed something strange. So strange that at first he thought he might be having a dream, or rather a nightmare. The little terraced house that he shared with his grandma just wasn't there. Instead, there was a smouldering wreck and a gap in the row of houses. The roof had fallen in, and so had most of the first floor. The ground was a mess of bricks, tiles, and furniture. Was that the old tin bath, or the armchair, or the sideboard? All were upside down and blackened by fire. A fire engine was at the scene, but the firemen were packing up their hose. There was nothing more that could be done. A crowd of people stood and stared. Some had their arms round each other, some were sobbing, others were muttering words of sadness. Poor old Mrs. Grote. She'd lived there for 50 years. She didn't deserve this. It would all have been over in a flash. She wouldn't have known what hit her. It's the boy I feel most sorry about. Oh yes, the boy. He'd only just moved in. Poor little soul. He had his whole life ahead of him. They're all together in heaven now. It was only when Eric reached them that he realised they were talking about him. The boy felt the strangest feeling. It was as if he were at his own funeral. They must think he was buried under the rubble of the house with his poor grandmother, which he would have been had he not sneaked out of bed to help Sid at the zoo. He spotted Grandma's ear trumpet amongst the rubble. It had been crushed like everything else. Eric felt sick to his stomach. He should have been at home with Grandma. Maybe if he had, he might have been able to save her. The old lady was more than a little deaf. She must not have heard the air raid warning. The boy couldn't help but burst into floods of tears. Now he had not just lost his father and mother in the wretched war, but his grandmother too. Next he was about to lose his best friend in the world. Eric sobbed so hard that the onlookers turned and stared. "It's him! It's Eric! It's a miracle!" The boy found himself being crowded around, cuddled and hoisted high in the air as if he were prize at the fair. Being shy, Eric hated it. "The little blighter's alive! Praise the Lord! I'll take the boy in. He can live with me in my sweet shop," suggested a portly man. The boy tried to smile. These grown-ups were doing their best to be nice, but all Eric wanted was to curl up into a ball and be left alone forever. Just then a pair of policemen plodded over. "Excuse me," began one firmly. "The boy needs to come down the station with us. We'll be the ones in charge of finding him a home." With that, Eric was lowered to the ground. "Was this your house, lad?" asked the policeman. He nodded, sniffing back the tears. "What's your name?" It's Eric. Eric Grout." The policeman held out his hand. "Come along then, Eric Grout. We'll look after you. Don't you worry. We'll find a nice home for you. Best get you out of London. It's not safe in the city for a little one like you." Eric didn't want to be sent to live with strangers far away. He had to escape and save Gertrude. The boy said nothing, but as they turned a street corner he shook free of their grip and made a run for it. One of the policemen blew his whistle. "Stop that boy!" Eric started down the road as the policeman gave chase. Londoners had emerged from the underground or their bomb shelters. They were gathered in groups, inspecting the terrible damage from the night's bombing. Rubble was being searched for survivors. People were calling out the names of loved ones. Others fell to their knees and wept to see everything they'd worked for all their lives destroyed. But most looked around as they heard the police whistle and the cry of "Stop that boy!" Why did he need to be stopped? Times were hard, and it had been known for some to steal from the bombed-out homes. Soon some folks were joining in the chase. Eric was frightened. All he could think to do was run faster and faster, and dodge out of the way of the sea of arms reaching out to grab him. Suddenly it seemed as if the whole of London were after him. Eric kept running. He was exhausted from being up all night, but somehow his little legs kept powering him along. He was running across roads, dodging out of the way of buses and taxis. Ahead of him was London Bridge, which stretched out across the River Thames. Behind him, the policeman and the mob were gaining on him. Up ahead, Eric could see a trio of policemen on bicycles pedalling in his direction. The policemen leapt off their bicycles and blocked his path. Now he was trapped. Eric was in big trouble for running away from the policeman. He had to flee, but there was nowhere to go. He held onto the balustrade of the bridge and looked out across the Thames. Chugging under the bridge was a barge loaded with hundreds of cardboard boxes. The angry grown-ups were getting closer and closer. Eric climbed onto the top of the railings. The mob stopped, forming a semicircle around him. "Don't do anything stupid, son," shouted the first policeman. Eric had only seconds to make his decision. Any moment now the boat would have passed. Could he? Eric closed his eyes. Once again he pictured how Gertrude leaped from one place to the other. So with all his strength, Eric pushed off with his feet and sailed through mid-air. Josh! He landed on the cardboard boxes on the boat. On London Bridge, whistles blew. Shouts could be heard, but they were deafened by the sound of the barge's engine as it powered up the Thames. Soon the bridge and all those on it were in the distance. Eric lay down on one of the boxes, resting after last night, which had been the most dramatic of nights. Grandma was gone forever. He couldn't let the same fate befall Gertrude. He had a matter of hours to save her. Soon Eric could feel the barge slowing as it entered the port. He hid between a gap in the boxes, and as soon as the barge reached the dock, he leapt off. The port was bustling with dockers hard at work, and no one paid much attention to the little stowaway. The boy had to find his Uncle Sid. With the old man's help, he was sure they could save Gertrude. In no time, Eric spotted the nearest underground station. Without money to pay for a train ticket, he had no choice but to slip through the barrier. When the ticket inspector called after him, "Hey, come back here!" he leapt onto the stair rail and slid down on his bottom. He sped past Londoners trudging up the steps, laden with blankets, pillows and the like after spending the night on the platform. Eric leapt aboard the first train and sped across the city. It was strange that for all the years Eric had known his Uncle Sid, he had never once visited his house. No one had. It was something of a family joke. You never went to Uncle Sid's house, he always came to yours. This made the boy imagine that the old man might be hiding something. Was his house stupidly small, or horrendously messy, or did he hate people using his toilet? Soon the boy was going to discover Sid's secret. Although he'd never been there, Eric remembered the old man's address from writing Christmas and birthday cards to him. So, studying the map on the train carriage, he found the right stop, Clapham Common, and hopped off. Blinking in the bright sunlight, Eric discovered it was just a short walk from the station to Sid's house. Up in the sky you could see one of London's many barrage balloons bobbing about. These huge balloons were tethered to the ground all over the city. Their job was to impede enemy aircraft, but judging by the devastation of last night's bombing raid, they hadn't made a big difference. Sid lived in an impossibly narrow terraced house, pretty much the same as every impossibly narrow terraced house on the street. That was the outside. The inside, however, was a completely different story. Eric knocked on the battered old front door. "I'm not in!" came a cry from the other side of the door. It was Sid all right, and by all accounts he was very much in. Eric knocked again. "I'm out!" "No, you're not," called the boy. "Yes, I am. Uncle Sid, it's me, Eric." Then came the sound of tin feet clanking on the floor. The letterbox opened. "What are you doing here?" hissed Sid through the letterbox. "I've come to see you." "I don't accept visitors, ever." There was a strange honking sound in the background. "What was that?" asked Eric. "What was what?" replied Sid, pretending he hadn't heard anything. "That sound." "I didn't hear anything. There it is again." "Oh, that. Yes, that." "I'm sorry, Eric, it's not a good time." "Please, I've nowhere else to go." "Don't be silly. What about your granny?" "She's gone." The next thing Eric heard was a bolt being unbolted and the lock being unlocked. The door opened and Sid stood there with his arms wide open. The boy walked towards him and they embraced. The pair stood and held each other tight. No words were necessary.